Hello, and welcome back to Sinister Seminar. I'm your host, Richard Berwin, and this is a History of Horror podcast, where today we will be discussing the 1982 filmed stage production of Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. If you haven't already, please check out the last episode where we explored the concept of the Greek chorus. And in this episode, we will be doing a plot breakdown of this specific adaptation with a couple of asides to discuss Burton's film, the 2005 revival, and the latest revival on Broadway. There will be spoilers, so proceed with caution, and make sure to check out the show notes for any and all content warnings. With all that being said, class is in session. Hello! Welcome back to Sinister Seminar. It's me, Richard, and this week we are discussing Sweeney Todd and the very bad, terrible, no good wigs. This is such a fun production of Sweeney Todd, and I'm very excited to be able to get to share it with you, especially as a first episode. I am a big fan of musicals, as pretty much every homosexual alive is a big fan of musicals, but I do adore musicals, and Sweeney Todd is one of my favorites. I do just, love listening to the soundtrack. It's just so much fun. I will go around singing Joanna all the time. And, well, let me start with the first time that I watched Sweeney Todd. The first time I had ever watched Sweeney Todd was at home with my mom. And we watched Tim Burton's Sweeney Todd, which I really enjoy it. I know that it has its problems, particularly the fact that it doesn't have the chorus, which is the entire reason that I wanted to do Sweeney Todd for this first introductory episode into the movies aspect of this podcast. But, it's very fun. And I think that even in its problems, it's just, it's a lot of fun. I think Tim Burton, his style works well with the translating the original stage production to the movie world. Even though I'm pretty sure he took more inspiration from the 2005 revival. If I am remembering correctly, there was an interview with Michael Cerveris, and he talked about Tim Burton to the show to scope out what the revival was about. But I enjoy the revival too. Listen, the revival has Patty motherfucking LuPone as Mrs. Lovett, and that in itself should sell you to at least go listen to the album on Spotify. And the fact that it's kind of set in an asylum is really interesting too. And they also get rid of the chorus in the way that the original was going for. And instead, all of the players play their own music and sing everything, and some of them have second roles, and they're just constantly there's this fun duality back and forth in that specific adaptation of Sweeney Todd. Okay, I guess we should get started on this actual musical, this specific production of Sweeney Todd. But we should go back in time and discuss that Sweeney Todd is based on a penny dreadful called The String of Pearls, a domestic romance from the 1840s. And now, penny dreadfuls were called such because they cost a penny and were infamously, kind of awful. The writing was bad. It's just, it's pulpy. And these penny dreadfuls were often shocking to the general Victorian audience of primarily England. And most penny dreadfuls notoriously didn't have an author attributed to them. So it was kind of like the Alan Smithy of its day. So it was just kind of like these novels that you would go pick up at a pharmacy and start reading because, oh my god, it's so shocking. Which, I mean, I feel like we do today as well. I mean, think of all of the bookstores in every public transportation place, and it's like you're not going to find the highest of literature, quote unquote. You're going to find things that are easily accessible and easily readable. Now, the original source material, The String of Pearls, is not at all like the musical that we have today. It's definitely, I think, falls closer to that, like a dark romance, in a sense, uh, rather than a outright horror. For example, Sweeney Todd, the character, I already did spoilers for all this, but Sweeney Todd, the character in the Penny Dreadful, does not have, uh, or at least does not use his razors to kill his patrons. Um, Instead, there was like a lever he would throw, and they would fall through the floor, and they would break their necks upon impact at the ground instead of, you know, him slicing their necks. Though, if they didn't die from breaking their neck, then he would go down with his razors and kill his patrons. The String of Pearls would be adapted for the stage quite often, because it didn't really have an author and like copyright was very complicated back then. These these penny dreadfuls would often be brought to the theaters, specifically The String of Pearls, because everyone seemed to love it, and each director would add something new to these penny plays, these penny up. The directors of each of these plays would add something new to the story because the Penny Dreadful itself was kind of bare bones in plot and structure, and so they would add characters, and maybe this production had this character, but the production down the street would have a different character and not this character at all, and it would add a completely different scene, and so it got to be very complicated as to what exactly the String of Pearls story was, as things were added and changed. The Victorians ate this up. Victorian England loved Sweeney Todd. And eventually, Sweeney Todd came to the Americas. The Americas also fell in love with Sweeney Todd. By 1970, Christopher Bond would write and produce the play that would eventually inspire Sondheim to make his musical. This specific production featured Sweeney Todd with a backstory and motivations, which was something that, like, a lot of the other previous productions of Sweeney Todd didn't do. Sweeney Todd was just kind of this killer, this evil figure, and Christopher Bond would, gave him the backstory, I believe, of him being shipped off to Australia, and as a inmate. Now, Sondheim in the 70s, we should cover Sondheim in the 70s, because he was a powerhouse of Broadway. Prior to Sweeney Todd, he had just come off of writing for Company, Follies, A Little Night Music, and Pacific Overtures, which were big productions that made a shit ton of money, and really cemented Sondheim as a powerhouse of the Broadway world. And after Sweeney Todd, he would go on to do Merrily We Roll Along, which was, once again, a powerhouse of a musical. Now, Sondheim's goal for this musical was to make a film. He said that it was to make a film for the stage, and was inspired by this composer called Hermann in writing the musical composition. And Hermann was known for many, many films, but most importantly, Psycho, which you can hear some of the Psycho uh, strings in the background of Sweeney Todd. Sondheim would work with Hugh Wheeler on the book of this musical, and they were collaborators on A Little Night Music and Pacific Overtures. And Hugh Wheeler also wrote the play Big Fish, Little Fish and adapted Shirley Jackson's Gothic novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Sondheim would also work with friend and frequent collaborator Harold Prince for the directorial aspect of the musical. Harold Prince is known for directing West Side Story, She Loves Me, Fiddler on the Roof, Cabaret, Company, A Little Night Music, Evita, and Merrily We Roll Along, as well as The Phantom of the Opera, among many more. And so the Evita connection is very interesting because of the Patti LuPone connection from earlier, and The Phantom of the Opera is very interesting because of the historic feud between Andrew Lloyd Webber and Stephen Sondheim. The musical would open in the Uris Theater on March 1st, 1979, and close June 29th, 1980, which is a day after my birthday, though I was not born in 1980, but you get the point. This is a notable year because it was a year after Halloween came out, which as a movie would reinvigorate the slasher genre in the 80s, though it wasn't the first slasher movie by any means, and actually Black Christmas could and probably should be the primary source of understanding where the slasher came from in the 80s, but I digress. That's a whole other thing to talk about. This is also important because the 1970s also saw widespread media attention for serial killers and true crime. It's often considered the golden age of serial killers and true crime, which is very gross, very disgusting. I very much don't like that. That is very ew gross. But that's what the culture was. You know what I mean? That's where people were focusing their attention. The North American tour of Sweeney Todd would start in October with Angela Lansbury and George Hearn reprising their roles, and it ended in August of 1981 in LA, and this is the specific recording that we are covering today. The original production would sweep at the Tonys and win everything it was nominated in besides Best Lighting, winning Best Leading Actress and Actor and Direction and Musical and blah, 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 blah. The 2005 John Doyle production was also very well known and highly regarded, starring Michael Cerveris and Patti motherfucking LuPone. And it took a minimalist aesthetic that Sondheim originally wanted for Sweeney Todd and set it in an asylum. The 2023 adaptation would star Josh Groban, Annalee Ashford, Jordan Fisher, and Gaten Matarazzo, though both Josh and Annalee would later be replaced with Aaron Tveit and Sutton Foster. This adaptation that we are talking about today has an 8.3 out of 10 on IMDb and a 4.1 on Letterboxd. Now, this is my favorite Letterboxd review that I found while searching. It's from someone whose username is simply Scotty, and the review goes as such. If you haven't seen Betsy Jocelyn shrilly warble her way through Greenfinch and Linnet Bird with her eyes crossed, you haven't fucking lived. And I do have to agree with that last statement. You really have not lived if you have not had your eardrums burst while listening to that arrangement. So, with all that being said, that's it for the preamble. So, let's get on with the show. So, the movie opens with a not so jaunty rolling of credits with these peculiar, linotype woodcut images being flashed on the screen, and there's this whole organ moment, and we learned that these images are from the cloth covering the stage. The curtains of the stage were this. It's not even the curtains. They kind of pulled it down. This cloth has this depiction of the hierarchy, the political and social hierarchy of this time in England. It is an illustration. It has all the social classes during the Industrial Revolution. And then there is this like intense, shrill whistle jump scare as it cuts to black. Now, I want to talk about this just very briefly. Now, I do have to say that I had put together this entire season back in August of 2024, not knowing where this country would lead us. And I do have to say that we are currently living in a time where, billionaires are rigging our elections and being thanked and invited by a felon who was elected as president. And it just feels a little too prescient now, and we'll get to a couple of other sections that I think are prescient to this moment in time that we are living in. But let's continue on with the movie, because the chorus arrives. This is our meat and potatoes for this seminar. The chorus arrives, and it's "Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd." And, these are made up of businessmen, the constable, beggar women, shopkeepers, grave keeps. Like, you can see Toby and Pirelli and Joanna, and it's the introduction to Sweeney as a dark and vengeful god, and the demon Barber, before cutting to black once more. This opens and sets the tale. We are told that this is going to be a villain outright. He's a demon. He's dark and vengeful. He's not going to be a good person. And I think as we get renditions of the Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd theme throughout the rest of the musical, it gets to be, there is a new understanding of what is happening with Sweeney, why he is doing what he is doing. And I think it's very brilliant to have the chorus come on, introduce the entire story, essentially, and then contextualize each part of it. I think that's one of my favorite parts of this musical, and why we are not doing Tim Burton. We go to No Place Like London, and, Anthony and Sweeney is in this tiny-ass boat. Anthony, of course, is our hopeful hero. He is played by Chris Grondahl. And, of course, Sweeney, who is our bitter antagonist, protagonist, George Hearn. And I have a little note here in my notes for this episode that Anthony looks like a Keebler elf, and I do stand by that. He does, in fact, look like a Keebler elf, and Anthony is just kind of like this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young man in his 40s that is like, oh my god, I love London, and life is gonna be great, and why don't you love London, Mr. Brooding over there? And Sweeney goes into his, everything is a pit of hell and disgust for very good reasons that we do not know yet. They eventually find their way onto the streets of London, and there is a beggar woman who sings her alms for a miserable woman. This is played by Sarah Woods. Anthony gives this woman money, and she offers her muff. Wouldn't you like to split me muff? And quickly moves on to Sweeney and says, don't I know you? Put that in your back pocket for later. In this part too, we also learned that Sweeney had escaped imprisonment and was found on a shipwreck by Anthony the sailor. I assume he was in the Navy, which is why he was out there. In this little exposition section, I call it Sweeney's Lament. He sings about the barber and his wife to Anthony, and gives the backstory about the Judge Turpin kicking Sweeney out and throwing him into jail because of Judge Turpin's lust for his wife. We get another jump scare whistle, and the set is whisked off into a completely different set. I think the set design in this musical is gorgeous and very smart. Please, if you have not watched this, go watch it. And this is where we get motherfucking Dame Angela Lansbury as Mrs. Lovett singing The Worst Pies in London. And, Angela really gives it her all throughout this. And, she's talking about, animals disappearing, popping pussies into pies. And she has just, this thick accent she's putting on. With these, this terrible wig. Let me also get into the wigs really quick, because this isn't even the worst wig yet. George Hearn's wig is atrocious, but it works for his character. Angela Lansbury's wig looks like cat ears and is atrocious, but works for her character. We'll get into some particularly bad ones later. But a fun fact about this is that this is such a physical song that in subsequent adaptations, the actresses who played it would often not breathe. It was a full-on sport trying to get through The Worst Pies in London because of Angela Lansbury's just entire physicality to it. In the Michael Cerveris interview that I listened to, he talked about Patti LuPone's attempt to do it, and she was doing it. But at one point, everyone else and the director had to be okay, that was Angela Lansbury's Mrs. Lovett. We're doing something different. We can do something different with the character. After that, after her little moment, she sings her version of Barber and his wife, and we get another aspect to the story. Once again, like I said with the Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd, we often get the same story over and over again, and we get different perspectives and different additions until we get the truth of the matter at the end. And I think this is very fun in a way that it's kind of a callback to the fact that these plays done throughout Victorian England were each different and told the same story but in different perspectives with different characters. So I think it's a nice callback to that. In this song, we learn that after Sweeney, in Barber and his wife, for the second time, we learned that foolishness was his crime, and that his wife had a year-old kid when Sweeney was kicked out of England, named Joanna, a pretty little thing. The beadle invites Lucy the wife, to a party where she knows no one, and all of these characters are wearing these animalistic masks, and this is the part where we don't see what happens to Lucy, but it is heavily implied that Judge Turpin rapes Lucy while everyone else at least watches and laughs. It's after this that Lucy poisons herself and Turpin has taken in Joanna. Soon after that, Sweeney has a little breakdown about it. Mrs. Lovett has saved Sweeney's Barber instruments and gives them to him. She's very careful with this box. And we get the next song with Sweeney singing "My Friends," this is my faithful friends. And there's like this tearful reunion. And in the background, we get Mrs. Lovett saying, "I'm your friend too, Mr. Todd." And there's this like leitmotif within it. There is a particular line that I like in the song called where he describes what he's going to do is drip precious rubies with it, and that's where we get the revenge plot section of the song. In this song, he says that at last my arm is complete again. And I think originally it was supposed to be my right arm is complete again, but with different characters taking on the role. If they were like a right-handed, they would say my right hand's complete again, but if they were left-handed, they would say my arm is complete again, which I think is a fun detail. The chorus comes back immediately after that, and we get "Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd" to describe the personage of this version of Sweeney, who is on his revenge plot. Now that we have a little bit more context as to what had happened to him. So now we're getting maybe he is a good guy, with just, as long as all he does is kill Judge Turpin. He doesn't, but, this is where we get our beautiful Joanna singing "Greenfinch, linnet bird, nightingale, blackbird, how do you sing?" The actress is quite the soprano, Betsy Jocelyn. I don't know if it's just the fact that this was recorded on a potato in 1982, or if it's just like the fact that it like between transferring this video onto digital, something got messed up. But I had a really hard understanding her as she was going to the heavens with her voice. And let me just say, once again, this fucking wig on this woman. My immediate thought this time watching Sweeney Todd, I was like, I just know her neck hurts having to have that wig on. Like, she probably has a headache. Like, that was very intense. Like, it's really giving Maddie Morphosis on the pit stop, where she had that, like, 50-pound wig that was bigger than her entire body. But, she sings about caged birds, and it's a very obvious metaphor that Johanna herself is a caged bird. And that's the entire song. Anthony sees Joanna on her balcony, and immediately falls in love with her because Romeo and Juliet. And he sings in the shadows to her, and he just watches on, very yearningfully. This is where we get the beggar woman coming in once again, singing alms, and she provides Anthony with exposition that he doesn't know yet, and basically being like, don't trespass, and that he has mischief on his mind, and she has more. She wants her muff fucking split, and scuttles off the screen. Anthony ends up going to a shopkeep and paying for a bird for 6 pence. And the shopkeep says something very interestingly. He says that blind birds so they sing without stopping, because they don't know what is night and day. Which, once again, I don't know. I feel like this is a very obvious metaphor. That for the fact that Joanna is a trapped and caged bird who just sings all day. Actually, I'm going back on that. All of the characters in Sweeney Todd feel like blind birds to the actions and consequences of the musical, because this is kind of an opera. They all just don't stop singing. They don't know what is good and what is bad, and so they just keep singing. They don't know happiness. They don't know the deep pits. It's all darkness for them, and so they must sing. It's at this point that we get the, I Feel You, Joanna song coming in, and he gifts the bird to Joanna as she descends the stairs. And he sings that he'll steal her, but she was already stolen. Mama, Judge Turpin behind you, because Judge Turpin was behind Anthony throughout all this. And Judge Turpin is played by Edmund Lindeck. He shoos away Anthony before threatening him. And the beetle, who is always with Judge Turpin, kills the bird, and the beetle's played by Calvin Remsburg. And even in this moment, like, in front of Anthony, Turpin makes, like, these weird advances on the young Joanna, who I believe is not 18. Like, I get this is Industrial Revolution England, but it's still weird. You know what I mean? And Anthony is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna steal you, but like actually, and not just your heart. And he like breaks the cage in half because, ooh, so masculine and muscular. And he dramatically tosses it to the side. We get the whistle again. And ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? Because we now get Toby the child, the man, played by Ken Jennings, as he sings about Pirelli's miracle elixir, about regrowing your hair. Listen, as someone who is slightly balding, if only they had minoxidil back then. Now, I do have to say, this is the most homophobic wig I have ever seen in my entire life. This, like, weird mullet that Toby has going on, it's, like, disgustingly, like, gross. If you please go research this wig and tell me it is not the grossest piece of, like, rat out there. And, throughout the song, Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett kind of have their own asides, being like, this smells like piss. Ain't this piss? It'll eat through your boot. And Pirelli kind of comes out and is like, who the fuck are you? I'm a brat when I'm bumping that. No. Who the fuck are you? Turning my clients away. And Pirelli is played by Sal Mistretta. And, he is very giving, is he gay or European vibes. So Sweeney challenges Pirelli to a barber battle. Beetle is the judge to this contest. Pirelli is mostly focused on putting on a show for the audience and having them go, ooh, wow. And, Sweeney is just kind of focused on being a good barber. And we get some of Sondheim's genius lyrics to portray this fact. The Beetle, he has his whistle to call the challenge, and he recognizes Sweeney as the winner. And after that, Pirelli kind of is like indignant and leaves. Sweeney talks to the Beetle and is like, I'll give you the closest shave you will ever know. No evil intentions behind that. And Beetle's like, oh my god, yeah, I'll bring Judge Turpin. And the chorus returns as the action to the movie. The climax feels like it's coming to a climax. It's not coming to a climax, but that's what the chorus is for in this moment, is to raise the stakes as everything goes to plan. Once again, we get more alms, but this time at the pie shop, where Mrs. Lovett kicks out the beggar woman, fully knowing who she is, which, once again, we as the audience do not know that. And we're not supposed to know that she knows who the beggar woman is. And it's at this moment, like, Sweeney's like, oh, Judge Turpin isn't coming, and oh, I'm so sad, my plans have been ruined. And Mrs. Lovett's like, it's only Friday. What are you doing? And she sings him like a lullaby to calm him down. And Anthony returns, being like, oh, I have to steal away Joanna. Please help me, Sweeney. And Sweeney's like, yes, you can bring her back here. But first, make your plans. Sweeney ultimately is not happy that Anthony wants to take Joanna. And is like, I haven't even met my own daughter yet. Why do you get to steal my daughter? Sweeney, like, goes up to his apartment and finds Pirelli there. And Pirelli is, like, very Italian in the moment until we learn that he is not Italian and is actually Irish and used to be one of Sweeney Todd's assistants. And he blackmails Sweeney Todd. And Sweeney's like, and chokes him out and shoves him in a chest and slits his throat. Of course, Toby followed Pirelli along, but Mrs. Lovett takes care of Toby and gives him pies. Then Toby, like, snatches off his wig. Thank God. The wig makes an appearance, though. A reappearance, though. This not child, wears many wigs. All of them have called me a faggot. Toby eventually goes upstairs to try and find Pirelli, but Sweeney, like, lies to Toby and gives gin to the child, not child. And there's this ominous orchestra with it. This is where the chorus comes back in, and we get a Tend the Tale, and they lament Sweeney's humanity because this was the first kill and not Judge Turpin. So now there's a bloodthirst there. We go back to a conversation with the Beetle and Judge Turpin as the Beetle kind of serves Disney's 43rd first gay character, and, like, kind of seduces? Not really seduces, but kind of, like, gets really close to Turpin and is like, you're so handsome, but you could be so much more handsome if you went and got a shave. And then maybe your adopted daughter will have sex with you, but I'll for sure have sex with you. And while this conversation is happening, Joanna and Anthony are singing back and forth to each other and not really listening to each other. She's like, marry me Monday. And, like, there's this kiss me leitmotif and the steal you Joanna motif. It's all back and forth. There's a lot of things happening. It's very anxiety fueled. Judge Turpin almost catches the young lovers, but the Beetle is like, let's go. Why don't you go right now to go and get a shave? And the young lovers fall into each other in this, like, playful embrace. There's, like, feet kicking. It's quite a moment for these two characters to have fallen into each other in shadow. So eventually Judge Turpin makes his way to Sweeney's barber shop for a nice shave. And, you know, in the background, Mrs. Lovett is taking care of Toby. It's kind of given Auntie Lovett vibes. It's actually kind of cute, their relationship at this part of the musical. It takes quite the turn later on. But upstairs, the two are having this little duet with Pretty Women. And, you know, Sweeney's kind of doing a whistle while you work. You know, there's this, like, bum 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 thing that Judge Turpin does, and they're kind of, like, singing to each other, but not to each other at the same time. As tensions rise and rise and rise, as Sweeney prepares to slit Judge Turpin's throat, but Anthony bursts into the barber shop and is like, I have a plan on stealing Joanna, and Judge Turpin's like, you bitch! So Judge Turpin kind of turns around and is not really smacks the shit out of Anthony, but, like, kind of verbally smacks the shit out of Anthony. And the same thing to Sweeney, and Sweeney's like, you have ruined everything. Anthony, get out of my barbershop. Sweeney descends into a sort of, like, psychosis, and this is where we get They All Deserve to Die as a song, as Mrs. Lovett comes in and is, like, trying to comfort Sweeney, but he kind of has this song that uh, once again, is very interesting to the current political moment of the time about, the upper class, the ruling class, having their boots in us poor things' faces, and how in the song Sweeney talks about how we just let them do that, and there's a little bit of truth to that statement. I mean, we can see that with the results of the last political election in America, and the consequences that came from that as we prepare for another Trump presidency. But you know, it's this this song that I think has encompassed a lot of. I think it's fascinating that this song was written in the 70s and its relevance to the modern time period. I think it kind of just goes to show the state of politics and its dissension in America just kind of always being this terrible, terrible descent into fascism. Unfortunately, you know, Sweeney has his little emo moment, and Mrs. Lovett lets Sweeney have his little emo moment. And she's like, "That's all fine and well, dear, but what are we gonna do about the body?" Referencing Pirelli. And she eventually has an idea. She's like, "What a shame. What a waste." She comes up with the idea of, chopping them up and putting them in the meat pies. But Sweeney, being a little simple and in his own head, very, very, very tunnel visioned, doesn't understand at first, but eventually he gets it. It's like, do you get it? Good, you got it. And we once again get this motif of man devouring man, and that being the history of the world. And again, as to my point about the last little bit, it is quite relevant now. And now we get like a good 20 minutes straight of just Sondheim doing wordplay. I cannot believe that Angela Lansbury and George Hearn was able to, and like every actor after this, was able to like memorize this entire section of the musical. There's the priest and the royal marine, the squire, the vicar, the tailor, etc., and so forth. And, we get this. I think Angela Lansbury does a really good job at embodying Mrs. Lovett in this scene. She does this little dance, and like it's all great and good, and it ends with a "will serve anyone," meaning anyone at all. And I love the little double entendre of that, of like, we'll serve anyone, meaning we'll kill anyone, but we'll also serve it to anyone, meaning that everyone is going to eat someone, which I think is fun. And that's the end of Act 1. Enter the intermission, where we like actually get the intermission. Like, there's a good 5 minutes spent on the intermission, which is funny. I know I spent that time to get a drink and sit down, go to the bathroom. We open up Act 2 once again with that insane jump scare whistle. And I don't think I talked about this earlier, but it definitely, given that this is in discussion or in conversation with the Industrial Revolution, I think it's very interesting to add the whistle to signify, to one, act as a jump scare, but also to signify the entrance of the characters and cutting between scenes, because it just kind of adds this bleak backdrop of the time period, the insane working conditions of the working class in this time, the it was a very deadly time for everyone. Child labor was a thing, and it it was it's kind of this intense reminder for everyone that the upper classes are ruling these lower classes in abject poverty. Can't afford to buy meat, which kind of mirrors the fact that we constantly have these discussions about not being able to afford eggs. And it's just, once again, the relevance of this musical to our modern political climate is a little too much, but it's fine. We get, once again, Toby going, "Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please?" With the same tune as the Pirelli earlier. But this time the con is with Mrs. Lovett and the people pies, and not piss in a bottle. And now Mrs. Lovett finally has some business, and she has this like beautiful new costume. Like, she went all out. She looks fantastic in this because she got that money now. Business could have been better. But Sweeney is constantly interrupting her business, and he's impatient and like excited for his new chair, which is the contraption which will send bodies down into the basement, so that way Mrs. Lovett can grind them into meat pies. In this section, he's like, "I'm going to pound the floor thrice when there's a new victim," and Mrs. Lovett is going to knock thrice when the package is delivered, as like an understanding between the two. And throughout this little section, we get the old beggar woman coming in and out of the shop, and Mrs. Lovett's constantly like, "Toby, get that old woman out. She is nothing but trouble." And we will learn why later. For a second time, we get or not for a second time. We get a reprise of "I Feel You, Joanna," in which Sweeney also laments, and there is this duet of a sorts between Sweeney and Anthony, because they are both yearning for Joanna for different reasons. And throughout the song, Sweeney is, killing his clients, sending them to the basement. At one point, he doesn't kill one of them because that man has a child with him and lets him go. The beggar woman also enters the mix every once in a while with, the smoke, sign of the devil, set you on fire portion of it. Witch, calling Mrs. Lovett a witch, and, being this portent of doom, this soothsayer, this Cassandra figure. More on that later. Throughout this scene, I also really like that we get to see quite a few background actors kind of living their normal life, doing their normal thing. So we get to see the London life outside of Sweeney, just kind of seeing how insignificant this entire scheme is in the grander scheme of London society. This also makes me think, especially with the old beggar woman and a couple of old beggar women in the chorus. And it just kind of makes me think about how, like, the 70s and the 80s, there was just this intense fear of the unhoused in cities. We see it a lot in quite a few different pieces of media. I would like to thank Ronald Reagan for that, and for our current political climate now, as to once again, our descent into fascism. Eventually, Anthony finds Joanna in an asylum. Joanna, once again, has quite a few bird noises, being the caged bird that sings. And for some reason, Beetle is outside of this asylum at this moment. And Anthony confronts him, being like, "Is there no justice in this city?" And that cuts immediately to a whistle. But in this sense, it doesn't come from the Industrial Revolution, it comes from the police, and we get an instance of police brutality because, the ruling class can kind of just do that. We cut off and we see Angela doing like a little ditty as she counts the money she's been earning from the pie shop. And she and Sweeney are kind of just like talking, but Sweeney's not really listening. He's kind of caught up in this entire murder spree and like waiting for Judge Turpin and also waiting on Joanna. But we also get this like uh this line from Mrs. Lovett talking about this new cherry wallpaper that she had bought when the chapel burned down, and I just think that is just so funny. This is where we get one of my favorite songs from the musical, Down by the Sea, and I think Mrs. Lovett or Angela Lansbury does like a really cool thing, or this really like, I like it, with the "Do you really want to know?" Just the way that she like says that line or sings that line, just tickles me every time. But she is singing to Sweeney, and talking about like getting married and settling down by the seaside in the English Channel, and just kind of like being like, this is all I really want, like just the two of us together and our adopted child, not child. And she kisses Sweeney, and it's very lovely. But Anthony ends up returning to give news on where he's found Joanna, and that brings Sweeney back to life because he can't be happy unless he gets his revenge. Which, respect. And Mrs. Lovett ends up leaving, but kind of not really leaving. After Anthony returns to give the news, the chorus returns, and Sweeney gives. There's this kind of back and forth as we get a new plan. There's 300 plans in this play, in this musical. And, in this one, Sweeney gives Anthony like a new fit, to act as a wig maker to cut the hair from the inmates so that way he can make wigs out of them. But that's just obviously a cover, which is interesting to think about, that these women in an asylum would, and historically accurate this is, but these women would get their hair shaved in order to make wigs for the ruling class. Once again, the class commentary in this play is insane. But Anthony gets this fit and this new identity, and Sweeney teaches him about hair to gain infiltration to the asylum, as well as and after Anthony leaves, the chorus comes back in as Sweeney writes a letter to Judge Turpin, and they mimic this letter. They read it aloud, essentially, that telling Judge Turpin that Anthony has stolen Joanna and will be waiting at the shop. And this entire chorus section is very unnerving. The way that they kind of like sing together, it sends chills down my spine. It's after this that we get another little moment between Toby and Mrs. Lovett, saying that he'd do anything to protect her. And we get another one of my favorite songs with the "Nothing's Gonna Harm You, Not While I'm Around," sung by Toby. And I do think that I prefer this song from Tim Burton's movie, Tim Burton's Sweeney Todd. I think it just feels, I don't know, maybe less creepy with an actual child singing it and not a child not child singing it. I still think it's fine in this version of the musical, but It's just kind of like, not weird, but a little odd. Toby shows Mrs. Lovett a kind of love that she really wasn't expecting because, her entire thing was pining after Sweeney, but getting this like unadulterated love from Toby is something that her character never really expected. But because she is so devoted to Sweeney, she kind of has this backup plan to throw Toby down into the basement to grind up meat because Toby suspects Sweeney Todd of evil doings. But throughout the song, like, Toby's like, oh, I suspect Sweeney of killing specifically Pirelli. And, Angela, Mrs. Lovett takes out Pirelli's purse and to take out a bonbon for Toby. And he immediately recognizes the purse and is like, no, 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 that is Mr. Pirelli's purse. Mrs. Lovett is trying to deflect the entire time. Then, Mrs. Lovett twists the nothing's gonna harm you, Toby, not while I'm around, and comes up with her own scheme. It's after the song is over that she brings Toby to the basement to teach him the trick of the trade, grinding the meat, send it through the grinder 3 times, and Toby is just a little too eager to grind the meat, which is fine. It's just a little concerning. The beetle unexpectedly enters Mrs. Lovett's place of residence to investigate, a weird stinky smoke coming from her pie shop. Beetle wants to go into the basement to see where they make the pies, and oh no, she doesn't have the key. Mr. Todd has the key. She's like, come back later and we'll get it all sorted out. And when Sweeney's here, you'll get a free shave and a haircut. But then Sweeney enters and is like, oh, enters with a little jump scare. Angela kind of does, Mrs. Lovett kind of does like a little sexy seduction of the beetle, which is very fun. Sweeney brings up the beetle to his pie shop to give him a shave, and as he gives the shave, Mrs. Lovett kind of does a little musical accompaniment to the murder. Goodbye, Beetle. Beetle gets sent down to the basement, where we find Toby grinding meat. Eventually, he finds a fingernail and is like, oh no. Jump scare for the beetle as he plummets to the basement. Toby freaks out, realizes he's locked in, and we get Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd once more, as everything starts going wrong, or as the climax to the musical crescendos. In this case, the chorus kind of turns from the working class to the City on Fire theme turns to the inmates, and there's just like this intense thing about like the moon, and it just gets very, very intense. The chorus, the choral note here. This is where we get a shadow play too, where Anthony enters the asylum to steal Joanna. The guard suspects him. Their fight ensues. Joanna ends up taking the gun and killing the guard. She's like still singing throughout this. We once again get the City on Fire melody. It's just very intense in this moment. The City on Fire in the asylum turns to the City on Fire at the Lovett residence, at the meat pie shop, as Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett go down to the basement to go searching for Toby, but is unable to find him. We get the beggar woman also entering, looking for the beetle, knowing that he's there, but unable to find him, while also singing about how Mrs. Lovett is deceitful. Joanna, now dressed as a male sailor, enters the residence with Anthony, and he sings a little lullaby to calm down Joanna. This lullaby kind of being the pearls to rubies from the mountains of Peru that entire thing again. These plans once more to leave. Anthony ends up leaving. Joanna kind of nervously awaits in the barber shop. The beggar woman breaks into the barber shop, and Joanna hides in the trunk so that way she isn't seen. The beggar woman kind of does this weird reenactment dance with this imaginary child in the barber shop. And if at this point you don't know, the beggar woman is in fact dear Lucy, Sweeney's former wife. It ends up being this like realization in like a few moments, but I think I personally, the first time I watched the musical, or I guess Tim Burton's Sweeney Todd, I kind of understood that the beggar woman was supposed to be Lucy. I feel like there's so many indications early on, like why would we have this beggar woman anyway? But if you're listening to this and you've gotten this far, let me know in the comments how long it took you to learn that the beggar woman was Sweeney's wife, Lucy. Sweeney arrives at his barbershop and finds the beggar woman and is like, I don't have time for you. He kills her, sends her down the chute. The judge arrives for just one more shave. Once again, we get Pretty Woman, but it's a little scary this time. They talk about Sweeney talks about their fellow taste in women. Judge Turpin is like, what? Wait, what do you mean? Sweeney reveals that he is in fact Benjamin Barker, slits his throat. Ghostface cleans his knife and sends the judge down the shaft. This is at the point where Joanna tries escaping, but Sweeney catches her, doesn't recognize her as a woman, and tries to kill her, but she escapes when Mrs. Lovett calls up from the basement. Enter the chorus again to sing Attend the Tale, and it's just, this entire section just ramps up. The tension just builds and builds and builds. And Mrs. Lovett in the basement is like surrounded by these dead bodies. And the judge is actually not quite dead yet and jump scares Angela until he finally dies. But she like kneels down and recognizes the beggar woman as Lucy. And she's like, oh no, what have you done? Sweeney comes down and comes to help with the bodies and is like, Mrs. Lovett's like, don't touch that body. And Sweeney's like, this is just an old beggar woman, but then finally recognizes her as Lucy. And is like, he's like, she said, don't I know you? And duh, obviously. He confronts Mrs. Lovett about it, and she's like, I never lied. I said that she drank poison. I didn't say she died. Calls her a poor thing. And the two of them sing over each other. Mrs. Lovett becomes more and more desperate, trying to appease Sweeney with this lullaby. But he, instantaneously comes up with a plan and diverts Mrs. Lovett's attention and goes back into the history of the world, my pet, as the two of them sing over each other in this little, dance waltz, to which he throws her in the oven and cooks her alive. He goes back to cradle the body and enter Toby with another homophobic wig. This wig, though, this time, is completely white, as if the shock of the beetle and the fact that he was grinding up human bodies just, scared him so much that he has gone insane. I don't know about that, but this wig is insane. Why do we have this wig? Why does this character have 300 wigs? And why are they all terrible? Toby comes in, he grabs the knife and kind of absentmindedly kills Sweeney. And it's just there's this cycle of abuse that comes and, like, abusers abuse. And he kind of sings this, like, patty cake rendition as he does it. The police and the lovers break in right after Toby kills Sweeney, and he's, like, just keeps on babbling on. But whatever. Enter the chorus again. As soon as Toby rips off his wig once again. It's just these wigs, man, these wigs. Anyway, we get the rendition of Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd again now that we've got the full picture, and it just ends up being a more tragic rendition of Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd. I think at the beginning it was a little more spooky, and now it's more sad. And that's where we get the bows. That's the end of our movie, y'all. Final thoughts. I love this musical. I can understand why a lot of people do not like Sweeney Todd in general, like, or even Sondheim in general. Actually, I don't understand why people don't like Sondheim. Sondheim is a genius. But I digress. This is just so wonderful to be able to see a legend be able to do something like this. Like, to see Angela Lansbury just kind of, like, fucking kill a role is insane. So if you have gotten to this far, to this point in the podcast, I would highly suggest to go watch it. Honestly, if you're not into horror, I would still consider this to be a very tame version of horror, or a thriller, a slasher. It's more along the lines of a tragedy than it is too much of a horror movie. So I say just go check it out. It's all stage blood. The murder, the scariest part is the wigs, Everything else is just a little over the top and cuckoo bananas. But yeah. Thank you all for listening. I think it is time that I reveal next week's episode. And for that, I wanted to stay in the realm of, like, a clearly defined chorus, but something with a little bit of structure. But I wanted it to get a little bit more abstract in the way that the chorus is defined. Something a little bit more weird. So next week, join me in watching Alejandro Jodorowsky's 1989 film, Santa Sangre. It's a little weird, but I think that is just going to be the theme of this entire season. You can find it streaming for free on Tubi and Amazon Prime, or you can rent it on Google Play and Apple TV for $1.99 and $3.99 respectively. With that, see you next week, and stay tuned for credits. Class is dismissed. This podcast is researched, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Richard Berwind. You can find more of me on Instagram at Richard J. Boy. That's Richard J. B-O-I-I-I, or on Twitter at Berwind Richard. Though, if you voyaged away from Twitter, you can find me on Blue Sky at richardberwind.bsky.social. You can follow this podcast everywhere at Sinister Seminar, including Blue Sky, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure to hit follow and leave a like, comment, and rating on your podcatcher of choice. Thank you for listening.